I'm not going to do too long of an introduction because I really want him to get going on this incredible program. Lieutenant Colonel Jerry VanEngen, U.S. Air Force retired. He spent 26 years in the Air Force, and he flew, are you ready for this, 150 combat missions in Vietnam, 135, and Iraq, 15. He has been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, 10 Air Medals, and the Vietnam Cross of Gallantry. He'll be speaking today specifically about the F-4 Wild Weasel that he flew in Iraq. The Wild Weasel was equipped with equipment to detect surface-to-air missile threats and neutralize them. He's one of our longest-lasting teachers for kids here during our Bridging the Generations program. So I'm going to turn it. It's an honor to have you here, Jerry. Thank you.
I'm going to stand over here because I'm getting filmed, and I want them to focus on the slides and not me. Some of you might wonder why I'm wearing my flight suit today, because I've been retired for almost 20 years, and the answer is that I still can. I do have to admit I cheated a little bit. When you get your uniforms, you get 4 flight suits that fit you pretty tightly, and then you get one real loose one that you wear when you go over water, and you have a poopy suit underneath it. And guess which one I kept? And if I hold my breath, I can still get in it. So 20 years ago, almost to the day, a month ago, 20 years ago, I flew my last F-4 mission. It was a sad mission because it was to the boneyard, to take one of the last F-4 Wild Weasels to the boneyard in the Air Force inventory and shut the system down. I always tell people that we went to the boneyard together, because a couple months later I retired after 26 years. I get a little bit about my history. I joined the Air Force to avoid the draft. I was hoping I was going to graduate from college in 4 years, and I had a draft number of 40 in a county that was drafted to 250, so I knew I was going to Vietnam. I'm terribly afraid of snakes, so I decided that it would be better to fly over the jungle as opposed to crawl around in it, and so I applied to the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines to fly. Chose the Air Force because they had the most airplanes. That's how much I knew about it. And unfortunately, my first assignment undergraduate navigator training was to an AC-130 gunship in Vietnam, and on the way they send you to 3 weeks of snake school in the Philippines, and you crawl around with the snakes for 3 weeks. So that didn't work out as planned, but anyway, like she said, did a year in the gunship, came back, did 3 years in the KC-135 Stratopig, passing gas, and then 2 years flying the B model 135 out of Andrews Air Force Base, hauling everybody from the president on down. I didn't have enough rank to fly the president, but I did fly Mondale during the Carter administration, and quite a few flights with Henry Kissinger, who was a joy. Got out of the Air Force because I wanted to get into fighters. Joined the Lincoln, Nebraska Air National Guard. Flew RF-4s for them as a part-timer for 6 years, and then came to Boise, Idaho as an instructor in the RF-4 in the 189th Tactical Recon Training Flight at Gowan. Did that for 6 years, and then converted to the Wild Weasel. Took over the school from the active duty and became the commander of that school for the last 3 years of its existence until 1996. Today, I'm going to tell you what I can remember about the F-4G. The F-4G was a highly modified Phantom. Every one of them was a modified 1969 E model. For those of you who know the difference, the E model was the Air Force's soft wing. That means it had slats on the front, whereas the rest of the F-4s that the Air Force flew were what we called hard wings. So it's relatively one of the newer F-4s. I think they made them for the United States Air Force until about 1974 was about the last F-4E that came out. But they picked the 69 models because they were the largest single block of F-4s that was available, and they decided that they needed this airplane pretty badly by this time. Next slide, Barry. Oh, I'd like to thank Barry Hill for putting this slide presentation together for me. I need to talk a little bit about Air Force Doctrine. Air Force Doctrine, of course, starts at the Puzzle Palace, the Pentagon, and kind of flows downhill like some other substances do. And it, you know, at some point it arrives at the crew dog level. The Air Force Doctrine, go ahead, next slide. On the Air Force Doctrine on air-to-air and air superiority, which it still holds today, is that the Air Force's job is to maintain air superiority. That means that the other guys can't come in and do what they want to our guys, but we can go over there and do what we want to their guys. We've done a pretty good job of this ever since Vietnam, and I actually read a statistic that there has been no ground deaths by enemy aircraft since World War II, I think. Maybe there might have been some in Korea, but I know that since, you know, in Vietnam there weren't. We kept the air forces away from our ground troops from you know, about for sure the Vietnam War forward. We have some goals. We want to own the sky. We want to be the superior weapon system in the air-to-air combat arena. And since Vietnam, we also want to be able to deter, if not completely annihilate, the surface-to-air missile threat. Surface-to-air missile threat started in the later stages of the Vietnam War, about 66, 67. They brought in the SA-2 surface-to-air missile. Next slide. First, about the air-to-air threat, the Air Force has done an outstanding job with coming up with weapon systems to deter our enemy in the air-to-air regime. With F-22, 18, 16, 15, and oncoming here in the near future, the F-35, we hope. Go next slide. Surface-to-air threat has become a serious threat to our airplanes as they go into enemy territory. There are you can count them, and this is back when I was in, and the numbers get bigger. I don't even know where they end now. They're probably up around SA 20, 22, something like that, which are really improved versions of some of these older systems. AAA, anti-aircraft artillery, you know, as old as World War I, has gotten more sophisticated, radar guided, and actually was the biggest threat in the Iraqi war below 10,000 feet. And thus one of the biggest reasons we flew most of our missions at above 18,000 feet to stay out of the AAA regime. Next slide. Talk a little bit about the threats actually these were all Soviet missile design. But they did a really good job of selling them or giving them to any country that would say they didn't like us. And one of their best customers in the 60s was, of course, North Vietnam. The SA-2 is a very large missile. It's on a single transportable launcher. It's not mobile, but it is transportable. So you can move these things around. Normally, they didn't move them around much. So we did know where these missiles were. The thing about surface-to-air missiles that we're going to really use against them is that they all have radar. That's the only way they can find the aircraft is with radar. And the radars have a specific electronic signature or thumbprint or whatever you want to call it. They have a certain frequency they operate on. They have a certain pulse recurrent frequency that they talk to their missile with. And they have certain power ranges that they use in order to find the airplanes they're trying to shoot down. And we're going to use that against them here when we design the Weasel. The SA-2 was the first surface-to-air missile that we had ever seen, and it took us a while to figure out how to defeat this missile, and there was a lot of people that ended up in the Hanoi Hilton because they didn't know how to defeat it. and it was a formidable threat. Because of it, and its follow-on, the SA-3, the Pentagon, if you go back to the Puzzle Pal slide, had decided they had better do something about this because we were losing significant amounts of aircrew and aircraft to these missiles, and it was altering our ability to strike our targets. So they set up a group of really smart electronic guys to figure out how to defeat these threats. They immediately took a look at the radars. Next slide. This is a fan-song radar. It's actually got elevation, azimuth, and a couple other radars. This is another radar or antenna that sends out a beam that talks to the missile, which gives a missile guidance to the missile once they track and acquire and track the airplane they're trying to shoot down. All of these send out a signal, and we're going to use that here to make them sorry they turned it on here. Next slide, please. As we got out of Vietnam, the Russians weren't sitting on their laurels. They said the SA-2, we figured out how to beat that, and so they got a better missile, the SA-3. It was faster, it was harder to see, smaller, and it had a better radar. But it had a different radar. The SA-3 radar operated on a different frequency and a different PRF. Next slide. A couple years down the road, they invented the SA-6 missile. This is a nasty missile. It can track you almost into the ground. It's entirely mobile. Matter of fact, it's on a T-70 Russian tank chassis, and it's totally innocuous in that it can operate without being tied to anything else. It helps to have an acquisition radar somewhere that can tell it where to look. But this missile is a formidable missile. And this is a ZSU-23. Oh no, this is the radar that's associated with that SA-6 missile. The first slide you saw was a transporter, and this is the phaser radar that it has. The acquisition radar is down here, looking around, big sweep. The tracking radar is up here. It tracks. When it tracks you, that's about when it's ready to launch the missile. Go ahead. This is a ZSU-23-4, which is also on a T-70 tank chassis. This little bugger has 4 23-millimeter guns, shoots at either a slow rate of 1,600 rounds a minute or a fast rate of almost 3,000 rounds a minute. This thing can put a lot of bullets in the sky, and if you happen to fly into its range, it doesn't even have to track you. It just starts spraying. If you can imagine a water hose with no end on it, with a lot of water coming out, if you just throw it back and forth, and then try to fly something through it without it getting hit, that's very difficult. Somebody's going to get wet. In this case, somebody's going to get hit by a bullet. This one we try to stay above. It's good up to about a half a mile and about 12,000 feet is its range limit. Unfortunately, they can put about 20 of those in a row, and it's real hard to get through that below 12,000 feet. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so what's the answer to all these nasty bad guys trying to shoot you down? The answer between 1975 and 1976 was go out and kill the radar. If they don't have a radar, the missiles aren't any good. And so that's what the engineers and the beeps and squeaks guys went out to design. Go ahead, next slide. What they decided to use, I'm not going to get into the whole history of the Wild Weasel. Actually, the Wild Weasel program started about 1965 with a two-seat F-100 and evolved into a two-seat F-105. And then as those airplanes were getting toward the end of their life, was replaced by the F-4G model, Wild Weasel, which was by far the most technical, logically advanced airplane to try to do this mission. Go ahead. Okay, the F-4 Wild Weasel, on the outside, some identifying characteristics is that the E model had a gun, internal gun right here, shot out here. They removed that whole gun and barrel assembly, and you see these little black radars here along the side and in the front. There's one in the tail, there's one in the front of the wing, there's one in the back of the wing on each side. Those are small little receiving antennas, 96 of them on that airplane, to receive any kind of electronic emission that was put out in a certain frequency band, which was tuned to the frequency bands of the bad guy radars. So this is a electronic sniffing airplane. They put the, next slide. There's not a whole lot of difference between the other F4s than this F4 in the front seat, a few switches. The big difference is in the back seat where the $60 million fuzzbuster is. I don't know how many of you guys, break the speed limit, so you got the little fuzzbusters in your car that tells you when the cops are putting the radar on you. But this one's pretty good. It can pick up any electronic emission for hundreds of miles if the emission is strong enough. And it shows it up on this phased array screen there, which is apparently still secret because I could not get a picture. I've been searching for about 2 months. I could not get a picture of that with the power on. With the power on, it's got a whole bunch of range rings that are selectable, and then the different radars appear on that as the number of the threat that you see. In other words, an SA2 shows up as a 2. A ZSU 23-4 shows up as a little Z, et cetera, et cetera. But the unique part of this system, which is way better than anything that we even have now today in the other airplanes, is that it not only gives you azimuth and elevation, azimuth and distance, it gives you elevation. And so if you think about the trigonometry of that, that gives you a point on the ground. You attach that to a GPS or an INET system, and you can come up with the exact coordinates for that bad guy threat. That allowed us to do a lot of magic things as compared to other airplanes that are out there in the threat environment. For instance, an SA-6, that nasty one that can track you all the way to the ground, it has a tactical range of approximately 16 miles if you're heading straight at the bad guy missile, because it's using some of your energy and some of the missile's energy to get to the point in space where it's going to blow you up. If you put that missile launcher on the beam, or otherwise 90 degrees to you, you cut the range on that missile down to about 10 miles. So by knowing exactly how far away from the threat we are, we can play the electronic chicken game where we drive in at 18 miles and actually turn toward the missile. And if the guy's tracking us goes, ooh, here's the target, I think I'll blow it up. And if he launches on us, we can either notch, what we call notch, or turn to the beam, and the missile will just won't make it. It takes a little guts to actually turn the airplane and look out there and wonder if the range was really right on that missile. But it works pretty good, and so that was our tactics, is to operate in between the max range and the beam range of these missiles while we set up to shoot a missile back at them. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the Wild Weasel patch that was one of the first ones designed. Wild Weasel YGBSM. When the first guys were asked to be Wild Weasels, they brought 24 guys into a room, told them what they were going to want them to do, and this was back in the F-100 days actually, and they had very unsophisticated receivers, and so what they had to do was they had to turn toward the missile, drive down at the missile, wait till the missile came back up at them, then fire a missile back at that range. And the theory was that if the missile was going real fast and it went just the opposite you, it blew up, that it would blow up behind you. After they explained that to these guys, they said, are there any questions? And one guy raised his hand and said, you gotta be shitting me. And Thus the YGBSM, which has stayed on our patch ever since. It's still on the patch today. It really is a mission that gets very busy in the combat area and very, very challenging, but very rewarding. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, so that's the inside. That's the fuzzbuster side of it. This is the ordnance we'll talk about. These big white missiles here are HARMs, high-speed anti-radiation missiles. We normally carried either 2 or 4 of those. Those are the things that we sent out to blow up the radars, and we'll talk specifically about that later. On the other side, we have 2 missiles, Maverick Missiles, AGM-65s, one IR, one TV, another standoff weapon we can employ. The 2 littler white missiles in the back here are AIM-7 Sparrows, and those were for self-defense. They were for air-to-air. The 2 even smaller little white missiles over here are AIM-9s, and those are heat-seeking air-to-air missiles also. So those 2, these missiles, the 7s and the 9s, were for in case the other air-to-air assets didn't do their job and some bad guy airplane was trying to shoot us down, we could defend ourselves. Go ahead. Okay, really the heart of the system that made this thing really work well was the AGM-88 HARM missile, high-speed anti-radiation missile. This is a mean mother. Next slide. Some of the numbers on this: it was a Mach 4 missile. It was radar homing. It was PRF and radar signature specific and agile, which means that you could send it out to go after a certain frequency in PRF, and it would sniff that thing out. If that radar shut down, it would open up its eyes and shoot anything else that we told it was a bad frequency to go after. So it was called flex logic. You could shoot it 360 degrees employment, which is kind of nice because while you're jinking and blinking, trying to avoid that missile that they shot at you, you could shoot this thing as you're turning away, as you're going toward it. You actually could shoot it, it would pitch up and go over, kind of over the shoulder shot, and the missile normally went up and then it went wherever it was going to go. It was kind of crazy to watch them take off once in a while. It was 1,000 pounds, had about a 250-pound warhead. The rest of it was rocket motor. And they used to cost $250,000. They're probably up to about $500,000 now. But that's because they're even better than they were when I was flying. Now they have their own GPS. And when I was flying, if the bad guy radar shut down, then the missile didn't know where to go anymore. So it would open up its eyes and look for any bad guy radar. If there weren't any bad guy radars on, unfortunately, it just flew along until it ran out of fuel and then dropped into didn't even go boom. The new ones, if the radar shut down, it knows the coordinates of where the radar was when it shut down, and it just goes and blows those coordinates up. And it's pretty accurate. Next slide. Here's a short film of AGM-88 hitting a target. You can see the antennas were that little antenna there, and I'm pretty sure those shots were shot from anywhere from 30 to 50 miles away. I think the range is still classified. I can tell you it's over 50 miles. There's really no bad guy tactical missile in the inventory that's that long range. The problem with shooting a long shot is that you have much better or much lower odds of the radar actually staying on during the whole flight of the missile. So we like to operate in the close range, 20 to 15 miles from the threat type area. There's another reason for that, is that most of the time the Weasel, the Air Force tactics at the time were to go in what we call large iron packages, 50 airplanes sometimes, and the Weasel was at the tip of the spear. We would go in and try to nanner to the radar sites and get their attention and basically play with them. And while our guys would be coming in behind us in 30 seconds, two or four ships, and we'd just offset to the side and protect them while they went in and dropped bombs on the target. worked pretty good, and then we'd just hang around until we were out of missiles or out of gas, or hopefully all our guys were out of the target area. The other missile we used, which was a pretty good missile, was AGM-65 Maverick. It had two seeker heads. One was a TV, and the other one was an IR. Both of them were pretty good. The IR worked better at night, obviously. Go ahead. It's not quite a supersonic missile. Weighs 500 pounds. It's basically just a 500-pound bomb with a smart seeker head in the front of it and a rocket. Had a 10 nautical mile range. It'd go a little further than that, but that's about as close as you could get before you could see the target and lock onto it. Like I said, either TV or IR. And in relationship to the HARM missile, these things were a dime a dozen. They probably only cost $1,000, so 1/10 the cost. Go ahead. See, there's a picture of F-4 shooting a Maverick. A little bit slower missile, but it was launch and leave, and when it hit something, it usually blew it up. One coming off an F-16. These are still, this is a TV going after a target. Actually, these probably were shot over at the UTTR, the Utah Test Range, southwest of Salt Lake. Except for that one, that was probably a Navy one. A-10 slug, love these things. There's an IR. And the nice thing is you shoot that thing and then you go away. So, but the bad part of it is you got to get to about 10 to 8 mile range, and that's a little closer than sometimes we'd like to get. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, I've mentioned a little bit about Wild Weasel tactics. First in, last out, no fear. 2 of these 3 statements are correct. Iraq Desert Storm. We really used the Weasel well in Desert Storm, along with all our other weapon systems. We did it on a rollback plan. The politicians let the generals fight this war, unlike the Vietnam War, and as you know, the results were excellent, and we did it well. If you remember, we sent a lot of cruise missiles in first, and they took out the communications and the early warning radars. What did that do for us? That means that they didn't know we were coming until we were a lot closer than they wanted us to be. Second thing it did is, then when we went in, the next thing we took out was the local acquisition radars, so that each one of these radars had to operate autonomously. What did that mean? That means they had to keep them on a lot longer. What did that mean for us? That means we had a lot longer, we could shoot the missiles from further away, and we had a better chance that they were going to hit the target before they shut the radar down. I was just talking to one of the guys that was in a F-111 over there during Desert Storm, and he said that he had an experience where someone had locked onto him in an SA-3, and all the launch cues were there. He doesn't know for sure whether they fired a missile or not, but certainly the launch cues were there that they had. And there was an F-4 Wild Weasel, and when the F-4 Wild Weasel shot one of these harms, they would go over, key their mic and say, Weasel Magnum. And Magnum meant that there's going to be a big rocket that's going to, when this thing lit up, it was at night, because we were flying all these missions at night. When this thing lit up at night and took off, it gave a pretty good plume in the air. It almost looked like an airplane had been shot down. And then it would just go smoking up in the air and then drop back down. And if there were, guys looking out the window, some of them you could actually see it when it first stage lit. So we wanted the good guys to know that we were shooting one of these things. But of course the bad guys were listening in on those freaks. And so they would shut their radars down when they'd hear the Magnum calls, which worked just as well as blowing the radar up, because as soon as I shut the radar down, the missile went stupid. And this guy was pretty sure that was the case when they shot the SA-3 at him, because all the missile guidance indications went away as soon as the Wild Weasel said Magnum. He said, I don't even know if the guy shot a missile or not. We did say Magnum more times than we shot missiles, so little comm jamming there. Probably should cut it off right soon. Okay, I got time for a couple of questions. I can tell you that this airplane was replaced for money reasons to get both the EF-111 and the F-4G were boneyarded, in my opinion, way too early to get money for the F-22. They replaced it with an F-16 with a pod that has about half the capabilities of the F-4G, but you know, back to the puzzle palace that makes the policy statements. So, any questions? Thank you a lot. Thank you guys for coming. I see a lot of 190th, 124th Fighter Group guys here today from the Boise Guard. Good to see you.
So Jerry's going to stick around for a while. Anybody wants to come up and talk, they can come on.